Picture this: the 1930s in Australia. The Great Depression is hitting hard. Farmers are struggling. And then, out of nowhere, comes an enemy so unexpected, so bizarre, that it could only be real. Welcome to the Great Emu War. In the year 1932, the Australian government and military faced a situation they could never have predicted. With wheat crops failing, farmers in Western Australia were desperate. But it wasn't the usual suspects causing the trouble. Nope, it wasn't pests or even drought. The culprits? Emus. Yep, you heard that right. The mighty emu, a large, flightless bird native to Australia, decided it was time for a snack. And a war. By the spring of 1932, emus, in their thousands, began descending on the wheat farms of Western Australia. They were hungry, they were numerous, and they were causing chaos. And they had no intention of being kicked off the buffet table. Farmers described the scene as an overwhelming force, an army of emus marching across the land, relentlessly destroying crops in their wake. Major J.P.W. Meredith, the leader of the military effort, was an experienced officer. He'd fought in World War I, but even he couldn't have predicted how this war would unfold. In fact, by the end of the campaign, Major Meredith was reported to be exasperated and disillusioned by the whole ordeal. It's safe to say the emus weren't exactly the kind of enemy he was used to facing. So, in November of 1932, Major J.P.W. Meredith and his troops were called to action. Armed with machine guns, they made their way to the battlefield, ready to face the enemy. Emus. They were equipped, confident, and probably thought this would be a walk in the park. Spoiler alert, it was not. On the first day of battle, the soldiers managed to kill just a handful of emus. Emerging from the chaos was something even more alarming. The emus were fast. The military quickly realized that these birds could run up to 50 kilometers an hour. That's 31 miles an hour. And they weren't easy to hit. As soldiers fired, the emus quickly fled, like, well, birds on a mission. The emus were also tough. Some were shot multiple times and still managed to escape. And here's where it gets even weirder. The emus seemed to have some actual tactics. Emus would travel in groups and then scatter in all directions when soldiers approached, confusing the troops and making it nearly impossible to hit them. The emus were working in teams. Was it just instinct, or were they smarter than we gave them credit for? At one point, soldiers set up an ambush near a dam, hoping to trap the emus. But you guessed it, the emus simply ran around it. Major Meredith was quoted, calling the emu army a very formidable adversary, as he realized that these birds were more resilient and difficult to manage than he had anticipated. Recognizing that the military wasn't getting anywhere, the government actually decided to send in reinforcements. Yes, reinforcements of more soldiers and a second wave of machine guns. But even with all that firepower, the emus continued to elude the troops. In fact, after 2 weeks of fighting, they had only managed to kill a few hundred emus, out of tens of thousands. After several weeks of battling it out with the emus, the soldiers found themselves on the losing side. The emus' resistance was stronger than anyone could have predicted. They were resilient, swift, and they had clearly outsmarted the military. The soldiers eventually retreated, and the emus were, for all intents and purposes, victorious. With the military's efforts failing, the government had no choice but to reconsider its approach. In 1934, they introduced a bounty system that offered payments to farmers for every emu they killed, encouraging them to actively reduce the emu population. The military had been no match for these crafty birds, but with local farmers now incentivized to take action, the government hoped this new strategy would bring results. So, in the end, the farmers weren't left completely without help. The government did provide compensation for the damages, and the aforementioned new methods of managing the emu population were put in place. But the Great Emu War didn't end with just birds in the outback. No, it went down in history as one of the most bizarre and humbling conflicts ever fought. The Great Emu War is a quirky chapter in Australia's history, one that reminds us of the resilience of nature and the folly of trying to control it. Well, thanks for checking us out. If you enjoyed this story of history's most unlikely war, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We're a new channel and would greatly appreciate it. We're excited to share more strange, true stories from history. Thanks for watching History Past Forward, where we fast forward the past and pass it on forward to you. Yeah, we're still working on the slogan. And, by the way, speaking of underdogs, we've got another crazy tale on the horizon. The story of Cliff Young, the 61-year-old potato farmer who shocked the world by winning the inaugural Sydney to Melbourne ultra marathon. An unlikely hero, much like the emus. And trust me, his story is just as wild. But more on that in a future video.